Okay, so we've got a lot of new faces. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Cynthia Overton. I am the Director of Tech Workplace Initiatives at the Cape Horror Center, where I work with a group of folks called Diversity Advocates. Is anybody here either in Diversity Advocates or familiar with Diversity Advocates? All right, yay! We should take a picture later, y'all. So I'm really excited about this next panel. It's entitled Inclusive Ecosystem Building, and it's sponsored by the Kauffman Foundation. Um, I am going to turn it over to the moderator, Micah, in just a bit, but I just want to introduce the panelists just very quickly. We have Micah Gill, Vanessa Warrenhorst, Warrenhurst, thank you, Jennifer Ellis, Chris Davidson, and Orlando Harris. So without further ado.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. How you doing? Isn't it a great day to be at Tech Inclusion? First of all, I want to thank all the volunteers, Melinda, Wayne, of course, Renzo, Antonia, and all the volunteers because they have been great, and also the Kauffman Foundation for sponsoring this panel. So let's give them a big applause. You know, it is extremely wrong that I'm going to say what I'm going to say right now, but I think that this is the coolest panel of all of the panels are at the conference, but it's true, I think so. And you are going to find why. Chris, Vanessa, Orlando, Jennifer, they're doing amazing things. And on the top of that, they're going to enlighten us about what is, this thing of building inclusive ecosystems. So if you need to identify one of them, and they're going to introduce in the first part of this panel themselves. Jennifer is with Last Mile. Check them out, please. Chris with a Start Out. Vanessa, she's with Wrong Horse Consulting, but I mean, you're gonna love her as well. And Orlando, what can I say? Our academia guy from San Francisco State University. Of course. So, my name is Micah, and I'm the founder of Heroica. Basically, what we do is to connect global talent to female-led projects. And our experience in ecosystems, and maybe this is why we are here, is because we are building and supporting regional and international ecosystems for women entrepreneurs around the world. Right now, we're running a pilot in Mexico City for women. Also, we're going to start one in Chile. And we started our summit and conference also 5 years ago in the Canary Islands, where we bring women entrepreneurs from Latin America, the US as well, Silicon Valley, Europe and Africa together. And we are gonna be bringing indigenous women as well next year, and some of these troublemakers. So when I had the opportunity to talk to them this week, I asked them, even though they're gonna introduce themselves, but maybe we can start with a conversation as well. I asked them, what is that ingredient or one of the things that any inclusive ecosystem must have? So Jennifer, please tell us who you are, why you're in this panel, and what do you think about this?
Great. Thank you, Micah. Is this working? Yes? Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Jennifer Ellis, and I run operations at The Last Mile. The Last Mile is the first ever in-prison coding curriculum. We're currently in 15 prisons across 5 different states. In the next 3 years, we hope to be in 50. We teach marketable software skills to men, women, and youth. I'm proud to say right now that currently the vast majority of our in-prison learners are women. So that's something I'm extraordinarily proud of. Also, a large part of the organization's mission is to help educate other organizations and corporations on fair chance hiring, specifically including the formerly incarcerated into your tech ecosystems. So when Micah asked me, what is like the main ingredient, in my opinion, dealing with inclusiveness, it's what I call true equity. You hear that word lately. It's been attached to diversity and inclusion. In fact, there's a lot of organizations now that have diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives or actual departments. And when I say true equity, I mean having an organization and a corporation willing to give someone a second chance, not to judge someone by the worst thing that they've ever done. When I think of inclusiveness, I think of really acceptance and awareness. So thank you. I'm going to pause for now. I could talk about that much longer, but I'm very glad to be here.
Great. Orlando, please let us know. And I remember during our conversation, when I asked you this question, you mentioned two words that I have here stuck in my brain. You talk about being intentional and also with a purpose.
Yes. Hi, Orlando Harris, and I represent San Francisco State University, where we serve approximately 30,000+ students, and we are one of the most diverse campuses in this United States of America. But within the CSU, we have 23 campuses. The CSU, California State University System, graduates the largest number of graduates every year, but we're also the largest university system in this country. And yes, I talk about the fact within my office of career services and leadership development, and I'm not an academic by trade, by the way. I'm actually an industry person. I love my academics, but I'm not an academic. But that being said, one of the things we talk about in our office is that we are the office where opportunity and talent connect. And we're very purposeful and intentional about how we go about preparing our talent, our students, our alums who come to our office and seeking help. But one of the things I like to talk to organizations about and companies about is, are you being intentional? Are you being really purposeful about when you talk regarding inclusion and equity and empowerment? And most of the time when pushed and challenged, a lot of times I find that the answers are just not there. Sometimes there's so much checking the box. And I think we have to be more than just checking the box. We have to go about this in a meaningful, relevant way. And the only way we can do that is to be intentional and purposeful about what we're doing.
Thank you, Orlando. I asked the same question to Vanessa, obviously, but she mentioned three things, actually, when we were in our little circle with Jennifer earlier, and she talked about flexible financial opportunities. She talked about childcare and transportation. So, hey, Vanessa, they're all yours.
Yate, my name is Vanessa Horsham, Danette from the Navajo Nation. I reside in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I have a small Indigenous women-led consulting company. There's 5 of us. We are working across multiple initiatives, particularly around looking at community-led economic development using our Indigenous lens. We don't just work with Native people, we work with all groups. And what our approach is, we take this concept of holistic, connected, relationship-based ecosystem design to apply it to whatever the challenge is. Separately, I'm a co-founder with other Indigenous women. We founded Native Women Lead, which is a growing organization. In the last 2 years, we have built a network in the United States of over 500 Indigenous women to help them grow into CEO and leadership positions. When I think about what is inclusive ecosystems, I think we have to be really careful with these buzzwords because at the end of the day, we're talking about humans. And so from my standpoint and the work that I see with the women that we work with in the United States, a couple things come up for me. Many of us don't realize that the United States has developing world challenges. And when we talk about access, we have to recognize that the way we access resources and capital and people has been hoarded. And that wealth has been hoarded, and that access has been hoarded on the backs of Black and brown people. And so we have to go deep into the history of this place. So yes, access to equitable, inclusive, affordable capital. We have to recognize that people have families, they've got lives, and what we need to be doing is not asking them to go through more trainings. We just need to be moving the money to get them to where they gotta go.
Yep. You were reading my mind. So Chris has been quite a surprise to get to know him.
Thank you.
And during our conversation, the words that I have stuck in my head are meet me in the middle. That was one of our things when we were talking. And the other thing that I actually really love is what were you saying regarding when we start reporting to a board, and the money starts coming in. Maybe sometimes we forget about being inclusive. So they're all yours.
Chris Davidson, I represent Start Out. Start Out, I'll do the plug quickly. It's an LGBTQ plus mentoring networking organization. We have over 15,000 people nationwide. We are outside of the country now as well. We're Europe and expanding South America. And we provide services for the LGBTQ plus entrepreneur, whether it's events, mentorship, networking, access to capital. You need help with a pitch deck. You apply to our online platform, and we can do a bunch of different services. I run our growth lab. So every 6 months, we bring in anywhere from 7 to 10 companies, and we give them much more hands-on support. So I think it's a great organization. Please look us up, startout.org. I wouldn't be doing the company of service without saying that. With that said, I look at it, I love everybody on the panel, and I love how everybody has a different lens, right? We use keywords, but my lens is economics, company, business. My main business is I work with organizations and scaling their operations and help them raise capital. And so everything is about opportunity and access, and this meet me in the middle is interesting, but I'll focus on, I think, as Orlando said, buzzwords, checking the boxes, very similar for LGBTQ+, where it's like, okay, what is the next thing that we have to provide for our organization at a company? And that could be, transitioning, that could be support for a spouse, for a husband or wife, same-sex partner. But what we were talking about earlier was that we're really good until there's an inflection point. And oftentimes, we're our own worst enemy, where if we're a small company organization and growing and we're very inclusive at the start, what happens when you have to bring in capital and report to a board? What happens when you have to go out and raise money from a pension fund from Minnesota or St. Louis, and they're asking you about your wife? And so it's in these periods where it's, at times we may allow money to interfere with our own ability to keep promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion. So it's almost our own mission to make sure that we can't let money or some of that access dissuade us from being authentic and original and keep promoting our agendas.
I told you this panel is awesome. For us, it's actually about accessible networks. We are seeing that women are not having access to the right networks, so they can scale their projects, their ideas. They can actually have access to the investors, the right investors that actually are going to understand what they're doing. So we keep working towards that and actually bringing different actors in the communities, especially in the international level, and learning from all the different ecosystems to see where it works for women and for girls if we actually want to give them support on creating these economic opportunities that are creating more than 35% of the growth in their communities. That brings us to the next question that I had for all of them. Actually, I was asking them, I want the audience, that comes here today, how they would be able to identify if an ecosystem, it could be a corporation, a regional ecosystem, or even any kind of organization or institution is inclusive. And I asked them, what would be the 3 factors that they have to look at so they can identify it? And if they haven't found that type of ecosystem yet, what would be the 3 factors that we have to look at to consider an ecosystem inclusive? Jennifer.
So I think it's imperative and very foundational for an organization to really define what their core values are. At the last mile, we call that guiding principles. But that's often a foundational necessary step that most corporations just skip over, or they blanketly say, we're committed to diversity, inclusion, and equity, but they don't define or infuse within their core values what diversion, inclusion, and equity actually means to that organization. I think it's imperative to have key definitions of what that means and to potentially incorporate that into the core values. Your core values should also be something that is not hidden away in the employee handbook. It should be something that is regularly talked about. It should be something that is shared with all of employees at all levels. It could be something that is brought up during performance reviews, all hands. In other words, keep re-examining and returning to the root of the organization. So I think a couple examples of guiding principles that could support diversity, inclusion, and equity, depending on how it's defined at a particular organization, could be something about respect, something about awareness, something about radical transparency, which leads me to my next main ingredient, which is awareness, which I said a moment ago. If an organization is open to either bringing in outside thought leaders, or if potentially a thought leader exists among the organization, to really bring together and create a safe space where employees can talk about self-awareness and where they can learn about their unconscious bias. So I think having that commitment and that extra layer of support when creating a safe space can be huge in building an ecosystem. And the last thing I would say is, a lot of organizations try to embody and model the core values from the top-down approach. And I actually think that it's much more beneficial to remove from that sort of model and instead create exercises or examples or space for all levels of employees to really embody what the core values are, to really understand and live what diversity, inclusion, and equity means to our organization.
Thank you, Jennifer. I remember. Yeah. Okay, great. 5 minutes. We started later. We had 30, so it should be 45.
It's fine.
But it's okay. We can negotiate. It's okay. So Orlando, you mentioned opportunity, pay, and mentoring when we were talking about this secret sauce. So please let us know.
Opportunity, pay, and mentorship. I think about a time when I first started my career, I started at Xerox Corporation. And when someone asked me a question about Xerox, I said Xerox was way ahead of the game. When I started at Xerox, I could actually look, in front of me, I could look to my left, I could look to my right, I could look up, and there were always people that looked like me. And they were willing to be mentors. They were willing to be there. And that opportunity and that mentorship went a long way in helping me advance in my career. And then we get to this point, we start talking about pay equity. And in today's time, what we're finding is that what I want to see, what I like to see is opportunities for, especially the constituents I serve, my students, that they're provided the opportunity, that they're provided the mentorship, and they're provided the pay equity. Because so many times that's not happening, especially with the unserved and underserved communities. They're being asked to come in at a lower level, which means they're starting out, without a leg up, as they say. And now when you start to look at pay, they're already behind when it comes to the pay scale. So that catching up process sometimes never happens. And so we have to look at it from the start and ensuring that there are mentors in place for them. I not only talk about it, but I literally live it myself. And I won't embarrass him, but one of my staff members is here today, Joseph Adams. And when I hired Joseph...
Let's not embarrass him.
Yeah, Joseph was a student. He became a student assistant. Now he's on my professional staff. And we worked together to continue to advance his career. He finished his graduate degree. And soon I'll be calling him Dr. Adams. And so I'm proud to know that we don't just talk it, but we live it. And we all have that opportunity to push one another, but we have to push these organizations to do the same.
Great. I know that Vanessa is going to bring also her point of view. And when we were talking about finding the leaders earlier, also having highly connected providers or, networks is extremely important, and also pay equity and access to capital.
So, for me, building inclusive, connected, rational ecosystems really is the fact that, wherever you're working, whatever you're building, doing, the community knows. They have the leaders. And I think that's the thing we overlook is we think we can come in and solve these, but really our job should be to lift and connect people. If we have, and I sit in a position of privilege right now because I get to speak to you in this place, the rest of my community doesn't have that. My job as this work is, where are the local leaders? Because they're doing it whether they know it or not. It's happening. Two, how are they problem solving, and what resources do they not have? So many of our resources back home in New Mexico, but also across the country for Native people, we're siloed, disconnected, and we live in a scarcity mentality. I mean, that's just real. We all think there's a limited amount of money, which it is finite. But frankly, where the money is being bottlenecked has nothing to do with what we're building. It's being bottlenecked, and we all understand it through very institutional racist systems. And so our job is to build those connected ecosystems by recognizing that we have to work together. Together is how we survive. Together is how we build relationships, and frankly, how we learn how to invest in each other. The last piece for me is that we have to recognize the financial institution, whether it's large-scale investments to microloans to opening a bank account. Our bank systems are no longer part of the community. We have to figure out how do we redesign, de-risk how we see investing in people. And who knows people? Those at the front lines working the hardest with the communities. So for me, access to capital is probably one of the most important pieces. Part of access to capital, though, is if we're not addressing the massive pay inequities, it doesn't mean shit. I mean, really, it doesn't. Because you can give people all the money they want through loans and investments, but if they can't make a living wage or offer living wages to their employees, we're just repeating a very harmful cycle. So those are three parts I think any one of us can do to think about how we build inclusive ecosystems.
Eh?
We less than 5 minutes, so 4 minutes.
You see? Yeah. Let's say 7. 7 is a lovely number. Some wine, a cocktail later. Okay, great. Go.
So I was never asked this question before, and it was, but my philosophy, and again with the lens of business, is if somebody is asking me to look at their company and talk about their culture, their this, their that, their business, their models, whatever. There are three things I always look for, and I say there are three words: see, feel, and act. So for an inclusive ecosystem, first thing I think you have to see it. Everybody, as we've been talking on the panel, a checkbox of this or that. Like, we look in the room, you look at Xerox around the floor. Are there people that look like you, or are there people that look differently than me? So the first thing, and I'm going to be quick, is just in this ecosystem you have to see it. Then for me it's a touchy-feely thing. You have to feel it. So just because there are people of different ethnicities, races, in a room doesn't mean that there is an inclusive ecosystem. Just because everybody's in the room together, also like the gut feel. And then the last aspect is act. And so like if they're in the room and they have to act like they're in an inclusive ecosystem. So you have to feel that you can be mentored based off of your race, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation. You have to act like you have equity. You have to act. So those, the see, the feel, the act, in my mind, whenever I look at a lot of different things, will represent whether something is actually what it is. And so for this, would be whether it is an inclusive ecosystem or not.
Thank you, Chris. I'm just going to say few things that we have found out in international and regional level, and later I'm going to leave few minutes, because she's adorable, she's going to give us a few minutes for questions, no? Because it would be such a pity that you don't make any questions to all of them. So for us internationally, what we have discovered is 3 keywords: education, the other one is visibility and resources. Education, we have discovered that many women and girls, they have to keep educating about what they do and what they need. Visibility, there's a huge lack of visibility, and that's why we started talking to different organizations, institutions, universities. It has to be a common effort of the communities to be able to create an inclusive ecosystem. If you don't bring all the actors into this conversation, there's always something missing for the community. And the third one is resources. Most of the corporations that are creating different impact funds that we are, listening to, they're moving from these corporate responsibility budgets into these impact funds. What we want is actually to show them where they should be investing these resources, because most of the time what we find out is that they are clueless. And we could continue this conversation moving into they are not aware how to create the social impact. But that would be a different panel, and maybe they can bring us next year for this one. What do you think?
Yes.
Great. So, any questions? Don't be shy. They had breakfast.
All right.
Great.
So I just need you to use the mic, please.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for all your insights. My name is Jessica. One of the things that is often on my mind is we talk about the importance of mentorship, and I think in the context of diversity and inclusion, it often ends up being people of those groups that are the mentors as well as the mentees. And I'm always very mindful of the additional sort of tax that puts in people's career. So if in my particular perspective, I'm sort of mid-level career, I wouldn't consider myself a senior person. I am Latin. I think within the Latinx community, there's a lot of more junior people that are coming to me for mentorship and advice. And I am putting a lot of time into that. And I'm just wondering, what is a sustainable way to maintain mentorship relationships where you're still able to give back to your community, but not at the expense of your own career and your development? Because if we can't grow, then we can't help others grow after us either.
I'll answer that from my perspective really quickly. One of the things that I do, and I don't know if you noticed, but I'm black. I'm an African-American male, and I mentor across the board. I have, younger people that I mentor across the entire spectrum. One of the things I do, though, is I insist that they have ownership on their part also, because if not, you will quickly burn yourself out. And so I'm always asking them to be prepared for the conversation. Make sure you understand what you want to get out of the next conversation. We're planning ahead. So many times they will send me a draft of the conversation that we're going to have for our next time. That's the only way I can actually manage the process to ensure that not only am I giving them quality time and of my time, but I'm also pushing them to learn and to grow on their own as well.
I would just like to add also, I've been involved in some interesting approaches that I think have been successful. I've been invited to groups where people can sort of organically talk with the intention of potentially finding mentors, mentees. And what I liked about that is sometimes, especially if there's somebody who's perhaps at a higher level than you, and I hate to use that hierarchy, but just to make my point, and they say, oh, I'll be your mentor. And some people feel pressure like, okay, great. And I can't say no. And I think it's really important to really listen for a deep alignment. And so, for example, when I've gone into these groups where I've invited, maybe there's 30 people, I have personally felt, and the last one was last night, matter of fact, someone came up to me and it was more of a feeling experience than a thought process. And she felt very drawn to what I do, and it felt different and it felt right. And it was apparent to both of us that there was a feeling there. And so I'm more inclined to say yes to that. And also when I'm looking for a mentor as well, but it's more of an organic experience where there is alignment and it's just not like within the confines of your resume or LinkedIn page, why it might make sense for you to be a mentor. So again, or a mentee, my advice is to maybe try to create groups where you can have that organic interaction and it feels right. And that tends to take away from the feeling of being drained if you really have that feeling experience.
Great. Any other questions? Do you want to talk to them afterwards? Yes? No? Let's give them a big applause. Chris, Vanessa, Orlando, Jennifer. Thank you so much.